Hi crafters, thanks for joining me. In this video I'm going to make a never-ending card where one scene turns into the other scene. This is a bit of a more complicated card, so the video is a bit longer, but I hope you stick with it and you enjoy the process. So for this video I use paper from the Colorburst collection from Lavinia stamps. Mostly I use this paper for my stamp organization, but I do use little bits for bookmarks and tags as well. So I'm going to use those leftover pieces that I always seem to accumulate, and I'm going to use those make them into a never-ending card. So I need 4 large pieces that are 5.5 by 2 3/4 inches. And then I'm going to need lots of small pieces. So I need 4 that are 2 3/4 inch square. And then I need 8 pieces that are the smallest, and these are 1 1/4 inch square. And I just stuck with 2 of each color for this, but you can change this, of course, if you prefer. And for my never-ending card, I'm going to use black. So I need 4 pieces that are 6 inches by 3 inches. And then I also used 4 pieces of holographic card, and these are 5 3/4 by 2 3/4 inches. So first thing I'm going to do is put together my never-ending card, and then I can let this dry. So I'm going to line up these pieces exactly so that the top and the bottom are perfectly in line, and use a bit of washi tape to hold it still. Then I'm going to put some glue on each of the corners, and I like to do my glue in a kind of triangular shape. I would recommend that you use glue for this stage rather than double-sided tape, because when you use the mechanism over and over again, double-sided tape can fail on you. Then I'm going to line up the other 2 pieces across these pieces so that they're going the opposite direction. And this is the most important part, I think, because you need to make sure that these are perfectly aligned. So I'm just picking up the pieces and making sure that all the 4 corners are perfectly in line. And with the white glue on there, the pieces can move a little bit. So I'm going to, once it's all perfectly in line, I'm going to use another piece of washi tape to make sure it stays still while it dries. And it doesn't matter if you get a bit of glue onto the black paper, because you're going to be covering up that anyway. So I'm just making sure it's all nicely straight, and then I can secure it with my washi tape. It's worth spending time on this step, because if it's not perfect, it won't fold and work properly. Once I have the washi tape on that, I'll let that sit for about an hour until it's completely dry. And now I can remove the washi tape from the outside as well as the inside. And then I can score. So what I'm going to do is lift up each flap and score at 1.5 inches, and then turn it, or do 1.5 inches and 4.5 inches. So I'm scoring underneath the flap, and then I'm going to turn it and then repeat this again so that the score lines are going the opposite direction. So I'm going to lift up the flap and then score 1.5 inches and 4.5 inches. And then I'm going to use my bone folder just to reinforce these folds. So I'm just going to gently open it up and then score on those inside folds. And I can do that on all the sides. And you should start to see your never-ending card coming to life now. So that's where it's helpful to see your fold lines. And the more that you fold this, of course, the easier it will start to go. So I like to fold it over and over again until it's moving nice and fluidly. And as you can see, you have 2 main pieces that are vertical, and then 2 main pieces that are horizontal. So I'm going to start by decorating the 2 pieces that go vertically. So I'm going to line up 2 pieces here and then use a bit of washi tape just to temporarily keep them together so that my scene will be split in half. And I'm going to use one of the Lavinia sticker stencils. This one is from set number 5 and it makes a perfect moon for this scene. So I'm going to stick it on the top of the card, making sure that it goes on both sides. And then I can add some ink blending on top of the mask. So I started with some russet orange and I put this around the mask. So I put the ink on the mask first and then dragged it out in little circles. And I wanted to go for colors that you would associate with autumn. So this orange works really well. And then after that, I added some paprika ink around the edges. And then I also brought a bit of this ink along the bottom as well. And I thought it would be nice to add some purple along the bottom. And I started with some violet chalk ink. But then I thought it wasn't quite dark and dramatic enough for the scene. So I decided to go over this again with an even darker purple. So I used one of the VersaFine Clair inks. This is the Monarch, which is a lovely deep dark purple. And I put this along the bottom edges and as well as the top edges, just to give this scene a bit of a dramatic border. And I love how this orange and red goes so well with this purple. So once I was happy with the ink blending, I removed that mask and now you can see that gorgeous moon. And you could use any color of the Colorburst collection that you like for your moon. And then what I wanted to do for my never ending card was to have one of the Lavinia Stamps witches and have her move as the card moves. So in order to do that, I needed to use my stamp platform so that I could line her up perfectly and then stamp her in the exact same place on the horizontal pieces of card. So these two, of course, are the vertical pieces, and then the other scene will be on the horizontal pieces. This witch is called Faba, and I stamped her on the left-hand side there. And then I wanted to have this little cute frog across from her. He's called the Small Frog. So I stamped him on a post-it note and cut it out so that I have a mask. And then I can use the green Oasis ink to stamp him. And then put that post-it note on top so that I can add some stamped images behind him. So he does have wings, but I thought he looked like he was sitting on something. So I used the fairy toadstool and I stamped this with the Morning Mist ink. And I stamped it just so it looks like he's sitting perfectly on the fairy toadstool. And then I wanted to have a really tall toadstool kind of behind him and above him. So what I did is I inked up the top half of the stamp and then wiped off the part with the grass and then lined it up so that it's just above where the other toadstool finishes off. And then I could stamp that. And then do the same to the bottom underneath the fairy toadstool. So I stamped it again, wiped off the top and the bit with the grass so that I could continue the toadstool underneath where he's sitting. And as you can see, it looks like it's a very long toadstool, which I think works really well. And then I just needed to add the bottom part of the toadstool with the grass on it, at the very bottom. And then I thought it needed a third toadstool, so right in front of him there. And this one will be shortest, so they gradually get taller. And I did happen to have an extra mask for this toadstool that I used on another card. So I just put this on the middle toadstool, the one with the frog on it. But you could always skip this step or include it if you prefer. But I do like how when you do use masks like this, it gives you layers on your card and it makes it a bit more interesting. And as I remove the masks, you can see how nice it looks to have the 3 layers of toadstools. So I decided to do something a little bit different to color in these toadstools. I have these metallic pens or markers that I got as a present. They're the Faber-Castell Metallics. And I'm going to use 3 colors, and I'll just color in one of the toadstools so that you can see. So this is the Nothing Else Metals color, which is a nice silver. And then there's the Copper Cabana, which I'm using first here around the rings. And then I'll color that in with the Heart of Gold color. And I love how these metallic-y colors work so well with this autumn color theme. And I also used a fine black pen just to draw the lines back on that I covered up with that silver. And I also used a sparkle pen on the fairy's hair or the witch's hair and the frog's wings. Did use a bit of Posca pen on her lantern. Now for the background, I'm going to use some gold ink and add some stars. These are the Star Group Mini stamp set, and these go along the top. And then I'm going to do a similar thing with the Mini Dots stamp and put that along the bottom. And I'll use these stamps again later on in this card. And I think with using the same ink again, it really helps to tie in the different scenes together. It also adds a little bit of shine to it, so when it catches the light like this, it looks gorgeous. Now for the tiny little pieces, I'm just adding some ink around the edges, and I started with the paprika ink here, and then I just put it around the edges, emphasizing one of the corners so that I knew which piece was going in the top, and the bottom, and the left and the right. And then I went and added some purple chalk as well. And I just have it on my silicone waffle flower media mat, which just helps to grip the paper so it doesn't move. And I'm going to stamp some of the miniature images in these 4 corners. So I have the mini rune stamp and the mini jinx stamp. And then I'll just line up one of the Lavinia stencils so that I can add a little bit of ground underneath them. And I just used a bit of the graphite ink for that ground. I think it helps just so it looks like those cute little cats aren't floating. And then on the other 2 corners, I used 2 of the spiders. They're part of the stamp set that's called Bugs, which has 5 bugs in it. So there's one spider that looks like it's coming down a spider web, and then one that looks like he's creeping. So I'm going to stamp those 2 images. And there's also a fairy web that I'm going to heat emboss on these 2 little corners as well. So I just used some Versamark ink, stamped it on the corner on both of these images. And then I found some kind of clear, sparkly embossing powder in my stash, and I put this on the webs and then heat embossed them. And I love the effect that you get on a spider web with clear embossing powder. It's really nice. And you can see it come to life here. It's just beautiful. And I do use this later on the other background, as you'll see in the video. And now here are the 4 finished corners, and then the other 4 as well, which I did off camera. On the larger squares, I did something similar. So I started by ink blending around the edges. I used purple chalk first, and then I used a bit of blue lagoon as well. And I thought it would be neat to have one of these squares for my sentiment and one where I could write a message to the recipient. The other 2 squares, which you'll see momentarily, they are just decorative. So I used a bit of paper that's slightly smaller than one of these squares and just glued it on top for my personal message. And then I stamped birthday wishes and just for you, and those are from the Lavinia stamp set that's called Heartfelt Verses. And then I used that same tiny star stamp as before with that gold ink and put that around the edges. And it looks just gorgeous. And you can see the other 2 squares here with that same star pattern. So the last thing to do is the other 2 panels which go horizontally on the card. And I'm just going to speed through this quickly just so that I can show you the important parts of this. So I just added some violet chalk around the edges. And then I wanted to have my witch on this card as well. I want her to be on the left-hand side of the scene. So I started just putting my cauldron on. This is the bubbling cauldron on the right. And then I added some bubbles there. And I will add more in this scene off camera, but just to give you an idea how I started it. And I want the witch to be able to change as you rotate the card. So I have had that stamp on my stamp platform the entire time. So it's in the same position, and I'm just going to stamp her so that she's going over the 2 pieces. So she's now cut in half, as it were. And if I've lined it up properly, when I put the other 2 pieces, up and down pieces, beside the sideways pieces, she should be in the same place. So I just wanted to point out that I did use some gel pens to color in the bottom of the witch here. But as you can see, she's in exactly the same place on the horizontal pieces as she is on the vertical. So it's a good thing to check before you put your card together. So now I'm going to glue these pieces onto the holographic card. And I've put them so that there's no holographic card in the middle pieces so that the scene isn't interrupted. And I'm just making sure that the top and the bottom are in line here so that it looks perfect when it's together. And similarly, I'll do the same on the other 2 pieces. And I'm going to line it up so that the witch will look the same on the horizontal pieces as she does on the vertical pieces. And then the top and the bottom of the witch, of course, need to line up too. And I love this sparkly fairy web in the top right of that purple scene, which just makes it even more magical. So as you can see, she lines up perfectly, so I'm ready to put the card together. So I used a combination of double-sided tape and glue to put these pieces onto this never-ending card because they will be handled quite a lot by the recipient. So I need to make sure that they're not going to fall apart. So once you've put the 2 pieces on the vertical pieces here, what you need to do is go back to your scoreboard again and score at 1.5 and 4.5 inches, but this time over top on the outside over your image, which might be counterintuitive because before we scored on the inside. So I think this is quite difficult to get your head round, but once you do it, it does make sense. So I'm going to do this on both pieces, and then I'm going to gently open up the card, and you can see where it wants to fold, and I'll need to bend with my fingers first, and then I can reinforce with my bone folder. And I'm following the score lines that I made before. And it will take a couple tries before this moves smoothly. Once it's moving nice and smoothly, I can add the other pieces on that go horizontally. So I'm going to open it up there so that I've got those horizontal pieces, and I can add those 2 pieces on, and I'm going to make sure I line up the witch again so that she can be in both of the scenes, which is just brilliant. And then I'll line up the top and the bottom of the witch as well. And then similarly, we will need to return to the scoreboard again. I'm just making sure this is perfectly lined up first. And then we'll go back to the scoreboard and score again at 1.5 inches and 4.5 inches on top of your image. And then we'll need to open up the card and gently reinforce those folds. So the first couple times it might be a little bit tricky and you might need to force it, but just use your bone folder and you can make it smoother. And the more you move it, of course, the easier it will get. And if you've done it properly, you'll have the one scene turn into the other scene. And then I'll just add the other pieces on. And again, I used double-sided tape as well as glue to make sure these stayed on. And I just stopped to make sure the pieces were glued down and pushed in before continuing. And then after I made sure that these pieces were nice and glued on, you can see the finished card here. And this is where you would write the sentiment. And then you can see this scene becoming the other scene. And I just love how it works both ways. A truly magical card. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video inspiring. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!